So the season 1 of Squid Game ended over 3 years ago, but if you remember, it was quite controversial at the time. After winning the game, the protagonist goes to the airport to finally reunite with his daughter, but on his way he spots the game recruiter. He tries to catch him but fails and takes the card from the potential new recruit. Gi-Hun calls the number and, seemingly against all logic, and certainly against the opinion of LeBron James, decides to turn his back on his daughter and return to the game. And obviously, if you take a step back from the story and remember you're watching Netflix, there's another way to interpret what's happening. Netflix people calling to say they need a setup for season 2, just in case season 1 turns out to be a hit. The protagonist might argue that his arc is complete and the series should end on a high note, but then the execs throw some cash his way, and suddenly the character is walking back into season 2, despite everything he's been through. This interpretation is all but confirmed by the show's creator, who revealed that he didn't receive any kind of bonus despite the massive success of season 1. In fact, he admitted that he needed to make season 2 to finally achieve financial success for himself. And this didn't bode well, especially given the structure of the show, which risked falling into formulaic territory, recycling the same concept with new games and new characters ad nauseam. And it's exactly what Netflix did with the reality TV show version, which was poorly received. And let's face it, there are countless ways to write a lazy season 2 for Squid Game, especially since we know Gi-Hun has to return to the game. It is what the viewers expect, and without it they would feel cheated. So what's the right approach? Should Gi-Hun go back to the game with a vague idea of getting revenge, which is what the ending of season 1 seems to suggest? Or should we say he went gambling and lost all his money, leaving him with no choice but to play the game again to pay his new debts? Or maybe his daughter somehow ends up in the game, or his wife, forcing Gi-Hun to return to save her. And if these ideas sound embarrassingly bad, remember that they're also safe from a marketing perspective. In fact, this approach mirrors the choices made by some of the most famous franchises in history. As audiences, we've been conditioned to expect bad sequels that undermined everything achieved by their predecessors. The rebels never truly defeated the Empire. The gladiator never actually overthrew the corrupt emperor or restored the Senate. And if kidnapping the daughter worked in the first movie, well, this time it's the wife who gets kidnapped. Reheating old ideas feels safer than creating something entirely new, at least in terms of box office returns. And dare I say it, the execs do have a point. They will likely point to something like Joker 2 and say, see, this is what happens when we give creative freedom to the artists. Sure, it's a risk, but it's also necessary to avoid the slow death of your IP, which is what happens when the executives take over the jobs of the artists. So yeah, things weren't looking great for season 2 of Squid Game, and it's easy to imagine the Netflix executives begging Won Dong-hyuk, the show's creator, to just play it safe and pick one of those predictable options. But he didn't. Despite all that pressure, and despite openly admitting that he was doing it for the money, that naive man decided to take it upon himself to actually write something good. I noted 5 reasons why I consider season 2 of Squid Game a storytelling success. Step 1. The show makes an excellent job at showing us that the surprise ending of season 1 was not a cheap hook for season 2, but it was really true to the character, with season 2 episode 1 showing us in details why Gi-Hun could never have returned to his daughter at the end of season 1. The PTSD is written all over his face. This is a haunted man who sees terrible things every time he closes his eyes. There's simply no room in his life for his daughter. For those of us who don't suffer from PTSD, it might seem easy to tell him to move on, get on that plane and start fresh. But even if he had taken the plane, it would only be his body traveling, while his mind would remain trapped in the trauma. There was never going to be a happy ending for him. So when Gi-Hun says that the prize money is blood money, and declares he won't spend it on anything other than revenge, it feels not just believable, but inevitable. And it was we, the audience, who were naive to think he could just get on the plane and enjoy the rest of his life. Step 2. Unlike what the end of season 1 suggested, the protagonist does not willingly return to the game, and what really happens is a lot more subtle. Of course, we can't have Squid Games without the Squid Game, just like we cannot have the Hunger Games without the Hunger Games or Harry Potter without Hogwarts. So from a writing perspective, we always knew Gi-Hun would have to return to the game somehow. But the real question was how to get him there. Well, I don't think the writers could have come up with a better justification for his return. Gi-Hun doesn't blindly go back into the game. He begins season 2 in hiding, bankrolling a team to strike back at the organizers of the game. And the slippery slope that eventually leads him back to the game feels fully earned. He's searching for the man in the suit. That makes sense. It's his only real lead, aside from somehow locating the island, but the storyline with the policeman shows us that this is next to impossible. Gi-Hun eventually tracks the man in the suit down, which grants him access to the actual organizers, but he's still at a major disadvantage. They'll only meet him on their terms. Again, this makes sense. He goes to meet them, knowing it's his best chance at revenge, but he wisely hires an elite team to protect him. When that plan fails, his plan B is to infiltrate the game, equipped with a GPS hidden in his mouth. Once again, this is a logical step. The bad guys eventually discover the GPS, and Gi-Hun is back where we need him, inside the game and helpless. But, and this is the key, it doesn't feel cheap. The writers earned his return to the game, and you know we are very far from
somehow Gi-Hun returned to the game.
Step 3, and this might seem the easiest, but it's also easy to get it wrong, is to make variations on the central concept. Many of us were surprised, maybe even a little disappointed, to see that the first game in Season 2 is exactly the same as in Season 1. However, the reason for this choice soon becomes clear. This time, Gi-Hun isn't there to follow the rules. He's a different man now, and the same game is used to establish his new intentions, to try to save as many as he can. A lesser show might have delayed the reveal that Gi-Hun is the previous winner, saving it for some dramatic moment later in the season, but here, he lays it all out as early as the first episode back in the game. With this new baseline established, the games from then on truly are different, but thanks to Gi-Hun's more assertive persona, the focus begins to shift. The games themselves take a backseat to the social debate surrounding the player's choices, to keep playing or to stop, and that variation is more interesting than simply having new games to play. Step 4, the show needs to introduce compelling new characters, and Squid Game naturally lends itself to that, with the many people playing the games. Yet, it's equally important to bring in new faces in the outside world. That brings us to a hotly debated topic in pop culture right now: how to introduce new characters into a franchise without undermining the established ones. Well, it's a minor character, but the show nails it so hard that I have to mention it. Mr. Kim's sacrifice to save Woo-seok is heartbreaking, unexpected, and elevates the new character, Woo-seok, far beyond what anyone could have anticipated going into that episode. But here's the genius of it. The story also elevates Mr. Kim. The man's a loan shark, someone we expect to be despicable, manipulative, and self-serving. When he tells Woo-seok that he won't abandon him, we assume he's lying. So when he ultimately dies to save Woo-seok, it's a moment of profound character growth that transforms both of them. This proves that elevating a new character doesn't require diminishing an old one. You can elevate both simultaneously. And let's take a moment to appreciate how brilliantly the writers handle the rock paper scissors -1 game. It's a deceptively simple setup, but they squeeze every drop of drama from it. First, they establish the rules of the game, including that refusing to play is considered a loss. Then they let the game play out. It could have been straightforward. A player loses and dies, but the writers push it further. The raising of the tension as they play faster and faster, Woo-seok's mistake, which makes sense because he's been established as being a bit naive, the realization in Mr. Kim's eyes that he has won, the realization in Woo-seok's eyes that he has lost, Mr. Kim's hands trembling, knowing he only has to remove scissors to kill his friend, Mr. Kim's eyes as he takes the decision to sacrifice himself for his friend. He was telling the truth about his attachment to Woo-seok. Woo-seok's eyes as he realizes Mr. Kim is going to die for him. That's amazing stuff. By the end, Woo-seok is unforgettable, and so is Mr. Kim. Step 5. Season 2 makes the most of its legacy characters. They are all deeply shaped by the events of Season 1. We've already discussed the protagonist, Gi-Hun, but this evolution is just as true for the policeman searching for the island, and perhaps more intriguingly, for the Season 2 antagonist, Wang In-ho. In-ho's presence in the game as a player is truly fascinating. While it's not explicitly explained, the subtext of the show lets us imagine two possibilities for his presence. In-ho must be curious about Gi-Hun, and he uses the game as a way to get to know him. This makes sense, because they are both former winners of the game, yet they've taken drastically different paths. Gi-Hun chose to fight the organizers, while In-ho joined them. The other possibility is that In-ho is merely doing it to entertain the game's watchers. After all, both men are former winners, and surely the watchers would pay good money to see that scenario play out. It's likely that both reasons are true. In-ho pretends to participate for the watchers' benefit, but his deeper motivation is personal. He's drawn to Gi-Hun, possibly seeking in him a love for humanity that he couldn't find in himself. This duality makes In-ho's character both compelling and tragic. He's torn between his role as a villain and his potential for redemption. And it's this complexity that leads me to believe that In-ho's final change of heart will be what truly ends Squid Game in Season 3. And if I may, this is only my second YouTube video, so if you enjoyed it and want to see more, please consider subscribing. And also I'd like to take this opportunity to say that I'm convinced that this guy, Lee Byung-hun, should be an absolute worldwide movie star. And I recommend watching some of these amazing movies from his filmography.